Hi, I'm Kevin Dehani, and today I'm going to show you step by step how to make a hyena mask for the Lion King. With one clay sculpt, I'm actually going to show you how to make 9 very different looking masks. I'll use a variety of products and materials, including plaster wrap, paper mache, and paper mache clay. All of the materials that you'll need, along with more information, can be found on my website at theartfulness.com. For the clay sculpture for Shenzai, I'm going to cheat a bit. I've got the leftover top half of Scar, his clay sculpture, and it's really a great form. It's a perfect form to start with, so I'll just fill it in and just kind of take off and go from there and sculpt Shenzai. It'll save a lot of time. The basic sculpture for Shenzai is complete, and she is very basic. Some sculptures will look exactly like their finished product, just as they are, but in Shenzai's case, she is just a very, very basic clay sculpt, and there's going to be a lot more added to her when I do paper mache clay, fine sculpting, adding her teeth, her hair, more eyes, everything. She will pretty much be unrecognizable to what you see right now. But this is the basic form over which I'm going to do plaster wrap. So the plaster wrap is the next step. The 2 layers of plaster wrap for the hyena are now dry, and so he's ready for paper mache. I use Scott shop towels, and specifically I use the Scott shop towels that are made for glass. There's a couple different kinds, as you can see, even by color, there's a color difference. The regular Scott shop towels are extremely thick, and I find that for me, I just don't like using them for doing paper mache. The ones for the glass are a little bit thinner. They're still extremely strong, and they have just a little bit of a pattern in them that you can probably see, as where the regular Scott shop towels are smooth. So just a little distinction there. For the rest of my materials needed, I've got my paper mache mix already, flour and salt. I just need to add the water. I've got my little sculpting tool here to help get into certain crevices. And that's it. He's ready for paper mache. The layer of paper mache is now dry, and so I just went and did some fine sanding using 400 grit sandpaper. Since this is just literally paper towel and some, flour and water paste, the sanding is very little effort at all. Any major bumps just come right out and smooth right out using this sandpaper. So the next step then is to do fine sculpting using paper mache clay. The recipe for this is on my website. I just made up this fresh batch. And what's great about using this material is I was able to do 9 identical hyena masks off of the same clay mold. And then I can customize each one using this paper mache clay. So I can do the 3 main hyenas, Ed, Shenzai, Banzai. They can all look very different, and then go on to use the clay to put features on for the hyena army. And each of them will look very individualized. So next step, fine sculpting using the paper mache clay. And after the paper mache clay is applied, you can either put it in the oven on 200 degrees and it'll harden, say, within about an hour or so. Otherwise, I usually just let them dry overnight, and by morning, any of the paper mache clay is rock hard, and it'll be ready for painting. I wanted to do a little demonstration and show how I use the paper mache clay for these hyena masks. So this is the plain generic hyena mask. And then what I have done so far to this one is taken the paper mache clay and I've made some eyes and accentuated the brows, brought down some cheek accentuations. And so the next thing I'm going to do is to build up the nose on this one a little bit. So this is the paper mache clay. Its consistency, the best way I can describe this would be if you've ever made or worked with like pizza dough or any kind of bread dough. So it's really rather sticky. And so what I do is I take a little bit of cornstarch and put it on my fingertips and then just tear off a chunk of the paper mache clay of what I think I'm going to use for this nose. And I like to keep it covered so it doesn't dry out too quickly. So that's a pretty good chunk. So what I'm going to do, take maybe a little bit more of the cornstarch just to be able to work with this a little bit better. So then what I do is I have a mixture of white glue and water. And so I just take a brush and I just kind of paint that on the surface of where I'm going to put the paper mache clay. Next is just to put the clay on here like this. And then what I'll do is I'll go back and, for lack of a better term, I'm going to like rehydrate the clay with this glue and water mixture. Since I've used quite a bit of cornstarch, the cornstarch really kind of, I don't know, sort of dries it out, I guess. This is going to kind of rehydrate it, make it really super malleable again. So then I take this painting knife. It's a little plastic painting knife, but it's a great tool to use. I kind of dip it in my water and glue mixture, and I use it to kind of smush down the edges of the paper mache clay so that it adheres to whatever I'm sticking it to. I could use my fingers, which I actually will in a minute here, but this is kind of a nice starting point to use that. So then I dip my fingers either in water here, or I also will dip my fingers in this sort of glue mixture and really use it to smooth down and shape this paper mache clay. So in this case, I want this hyena to have kind of a really sort of a funky, little bit of a misshapen nose. And if I wanted to, I could add more paper mache clay to this, no problem. So I think that's going to be pretty good. It's going to provide a really kind of a funny profile for this hyena's nose. And other than that, another great use for the paper mache clay is, you know, I've done some sanding on the surface of this paper mache mask, but there's still some kind of uneven, sort of rough areas. So what I'll do is I'll just take a little piece of the paper mache clay, dip it and saturate it really good in this glue mixture, and then I'll just spread it on. Spread it on like kind of like a paste. Even get some more glue right over those areas. And hopefully you can see how that's just completely smoothed out that area. And once this is dry, it'll dry hard as a rock, and that area will be completely smooth. So I'm just going to go here. There's a couple other areas. So you can see kind of like on the nose here. Just going to really smash it in good and turn it into a paste. And look how nicely that smoothed out that area. My last tip for using this is, like, for example, on the eyes and the nose. When I've really gone back with this glue mixture and rehydrated the clay, it can get very almost mushy and runny then. And so when you're doing fine details like his eyes, as you can see, I've got some kind of deep crevices in the eyes. What'll happen when it's really wet, really moist, it'll start to just sort of all run together. And you don't want that because I've sculpted some fine details. So I've got this little trick here, and what I do is I take cornstarch and I put it in this little sifter and just take something, I just kind of dust. I dust the paper mache clay with this cornstarch. That's why, as you can see, the eyes look all like there's a bunch of white powder on it, and there is, it's all this cornstarch. What'll happen is once the paper mache clay is dry, any powdered residue that's left on top, you just take a brush, a dry brush, and it just brushes right off. So it's just a great little tip. It kind of helps to fix the paper mache clay if it's really wet and runny. It helps to fix it in place long enough for the piece to dry. So that is using the paper mache clay, and once this is all dry, the next step will be to paint it. The paper mache clay is now completely dry and rock hard, and so the masks are ready for a layer of gesso. Gesso is an acrylic primer, and what it'll do is it'll basically help seal the paper mache, and it'll also provide kind of like a primer, a primed surface for the acrylic paints. So the gesso, this gesso is white, and I always like to kind of tint the gesso, just give it a little base. And so I'll be tinting it dark gray, because eventually the hyenas will all be different shades of gray. So next step is to do the gesso, and then we'll start with the real acrylic paints. The painted layer of tinted gesso is now dry, and so my next step, before I begin doing the actual real paints on the masks, is to attach all of the additional parts, the ears and hair. So what I've done is I've already started on one, and I have an ear template which I cut out of this gray craft foam. So I cut out a bunch of these, and then in order to attach them, I made a slit on the side of the mask, and on the inside I pulled the ear through just a little bit. I hot glued it, and then I kind of turned the little flap. I pulled the ear in probably about maybe a good 1/4 of an inch, and then I turned that little flap over and hot glued that. So that ear is really going to stay well in place. And then to give it a little bit of character, I bent the ear over and just put a little thin line of hot glue in there to keep it sort of bent over. And I took my scissors and made some cuts, because these hyenas have definitely been in some fights, and so I want to rough them up just a little bit. And then the last thing that I'll attach is the hair. And so what I've got is some very thick, probably, gosh, I don't know, not quite a 1/4 inch, so maybe 2/8 inch thick of this black craft foam, and I'll just cut out really thin, sort of pointy, dreadlock looking pieces of hair, just a few for each one. Do the same thing as with the ears. I'll cut slits in the head, stick the hair in, and then hot glue it from the other side. Once those are all in place, then I will do the painting. And the reason for that is because when I paint the face, I'll probably paint the ears as well, and I kind of want it to be the same color as the head, and I also want to cover up any gaps or the part of the slit. I want that painted as well. So that's why I do the ears first and then do the painting last. So next step will be the hair, and then start painting the masks. The painting of the hyena masks is now complete. I also added a row of teeth to each of the masks using white craft foam and hot glue. I decided to paint the masks in a kind of African tribal camouflage type pattern. Each of the masks has a very unique look due to customizing their features with the papier-mâché clay, and then each has a unique paint job. Individually, they all look very different, yet together they're cohesive, and they look like they all came from the same hyena army. So there you have it, 9 distinct hyena masks from one single clay sculpt.